Hello, everybody. The final panel, which is certainly not the least, it may be the last, is the future of net zero. And we have three fantastic panelists to join me. We're sitting alongside me. First of all, we have Tim Adamson, who is Chief Administrative Officer, Sustainability and ESG Director for Citi. Secondly, we have Michelle T. Davies, who is Global Head of Sustainability Law at EY, and Raul Sareen, General Manager, Sustainability and AI Solutions at AWS. Please give them a round of applause. And just a quick introduction. Well, first of all, sorry that we're a tiny bit late. Michelle has basically just got off a plane and come straight here. So I have to say a big thank you to her for joining us. And just to introduce the panel a little bit, we're going to talk about how businesses can navigate regulation, use emerging technologies, and align their operations with global climate targets, all while balancing economic growth. So it's a really straightforward panel, and no problems at all there to solve. So I'll just go straight in by asking the first question to Tim. Tim, what do you think are the most significant obstacles that you find your company facing in achieving its net zero targets?
Great, thank you. And good evening all, the last session, so hope you're still with us and energized. Net zero for a bank is predominantly our scope 3 emissions, our downstream emissions, our client financing. So I know Jim in the last session said for Pepsi that scope 3 was about 94% of their emissions. For a bank, it's probably near 97%. So we have some upstream impacts. We have sort of supply chain, but it's mostly paper, buying computers, that kind of thing. Our own operations is predominantly electricity-based. You know, we're not real economy, we're finance economy, so we don't have sort of big furnaces or industrial processes. So all of our emissions and our scope 3 is downstream. And therefore, it's the companies we finance. So their success is our success. We set our targets in line with science, in line with Paris-based targets, and we look for clients to understand their trajectories as well. And so as long as there's an alignment there, then we are set as long as the clients meet their emissions targets to meet our targets as well. But obviously, you know, we have a lot of clients. As a big multinational investment bank, we have 20,000 plus clients. So it's an awful lot of different clients that are feeding into our targets. So challenges for us are challenges for what is for the whole economy as well. So some sectors are doing better at transitioning, transportation. So EVs are progressing perhaps faster than they look like they were progressing a couple of years ago, but a lot of large-scale industrial processes, as I said, aluminum production, companies that smelters, etc. Technology is coming about, but it's slow, and so you know we're all watching that as well. And there are definitely harder sectors as well. Agriculture is a different one. It's not part of the energy system, so that's going to have different solutions. So there are some technological solutions, but there is also the pattern of consumption as well. So consumption preferences are going to play into that. So there's a lot of different factors, as I say, but for us, it's very much the success of our clients is our success.
I must just ask a quick, unplanned question. How many years of living in the US did it take before you started saying aluminum rather than aluminium?
When you say aluminium, people look back at you with a blank stare. Yeah. You sort of learn quite quickly. So, yeah. Okay. I say awesome as well.
Awesome, great, thank you. Raul, I wonder if I could just ask you on a similar theme, really. I mean, we're talking, all three of you, very much about the way you deal with the decarbonisation of clients rather than your own business, I think. So, Raul, perhaps you could just talk to people a bit about the challenges that you are finding your customers facing on the journey to net zero.
Absolutely, yeah. So, just a bit of a background. So, I lead the global sustainability and AI solutions at AWS, and our job is basically to help our customers not only look at sustainability as a transformative approach. So whether they are looking at decarbonizing their value chain, their entire plant operations, or they are looking at circularity of the products. They are looking at value chain transparency. And again, we are not bringing in, like, we obviously help them throughout their consultative approach and through the strategy, but we are not like really like helping them redefine the strategy. What we are saying is, how can technology really accelerate that, right? So most of the customers, they already have some idea on what they need to do from decarbonization perspective, or they work with, like the business consulting partners, what you probably do, right? And your company does. But, they really are looking for how technology can really accelerate that, right? And the biggest challenge that we hear from them is data, right? Like everyone wants to start with just understanding the baseline and where they are in terms of their sustainability reports, whether it's their carbon account, like how much they are, like what their GHG emissions are, what is their water, energy consumption overall across their business, which of the suppliers are like contributing more towards those emissions. So it can be like multiple things they really want to like understand. And what they tell us, right, we can have the best software in the world, we can have the best mechanism of identifying the emission factors and like doing the calculation, we can hire the best scientists, climate scientists, but what we really struggle with is data acquisition, right? And it's not only just about acquiring the data, it's the whole data management journey that they basically take. In fact, I was talking to some of our like ISV or SaaS providers who run on AWS, providing customers with ESG reporting and carbon accounting. And like an average time for till the time they sign a contract to the time they start deploying an ESG software is around 7 to 8 months. And they're like, we sign the contract and then we end up doing the whole data mapping exercise because our customers don't know what data they need to collect. Like we help them with understanding based on in different industry, what sort of data they should be collecting, what are the common like scope 3 categories they should be reporting to, but then where exactly is the data? Even if they have the data, how do they collect it, store it in a central location in a scale manner? How can they basically even like use that data to make business decisions, right? So our job at AWS is we are not like providing them with software for how to do ESG reporting. What we are helping them is from the entire like data management perspective, an end-to-end journey of all the way from collecting the data, ingesting it at scale, storing it, and then applying AI and Gen AI based applications to not only just help them either decarbonize, but also like providing them with data, like have them the ability to make data-driven decisions better.
Yeah.
Right? Like these are siloed data sources. 85% of the customers that we work with, they all are still using Excel-based templates to just even doing their sustainability reporting, right? Just one example I have, a very funny example. One of the largest steel manufacturers in the world, like I was talking to their mining division in Canada. They have around 52 sustainability analyst specialists just for that one division. And all they do is Excel, right? And they have to report on so they collect water sample, and then they have to send it to lab, third-party lab, who sends the information back on TDS, TSS, all those information. Then they have to send it to government regulatory body and also for CSRD-based reporting. And right now, it takes them 5 to 6 months just to get that information. Many of those times, they are out of, the limit, they are in violation, and they have to pay hefty fines. All we just did was, simple automate the entire workflow management for them. And now they can get the data in a matter of minutes or even like hours.
Yeah. Thank you. Lots of issues covered there.
Yeah.
I'm going to move it across, I think, to Michelle. You've had a bit of an extra time to rest from your travels. I want to just focus a bit on regulations. Lots and lots of new rules and regulations, many acronyms. Some people, I think, are very positive about it. Some are negative about it. There's a mixture here and there. I just wonder if you could give us an insight into how you think those regulatory changes are going to impact people's net zero strategies in the coming years.
Yeah, and the answer to that sort of answers part of the first question as well. But I did like what you said about planned questions, because I was not aware of any planned questions. So I'm like a rabbit caught in the headlights here, but it's fine.
There's no tricks, don't worry.
It's fine, it's fine. So there is just this huge amount of regulation that's hitting everybody. A lot of it is coming out from Europe. And the way that we tend to work with our clients is to sort of get behind what's causing the regulation, because that then helps them understand it, and it also helps them work out how best to deal with it. So if you think about all this regulation that's coming out, TCFD, CSRD, CSDDD, deforestation regulation. I mean, there's just a huge amount, all the circular economy, packaging, supply chain regulations, there's a lot. Greenwashing regulations. We tend to put them into 3 buckets. So the first bucket we call disclosure regulations. Why have they been introduced? Predominantly so that key stakeholders, and usually financial institutions, can get a better understanding, better visibility and understanding of sustainability risk within an organization, so that they can determine whether to continue to engage, and if so, on what terms. They can price the risk, work out whether they want to continue to engage. So those disclosure regulations like TCFD, CSRD, that's what they're aimed at. The second kind of regulation is what we call operational regulations. So all the supply chain and circular economy regulations, CBAM, the deforestation regulation, packaging regulations, etc. What's causing those? Why are they coming into effect? Now, this is what I'm going to say is a little bit controversial, and it's my view. It's not an EY view. But I think these are coming into effect because what the EU and other countries that are looking to adopt the same are trying to do is to create a more level playing field within their own markets, to stop cheap product coming in from elsewhere that has come from, and it's cheap because it's been grown on deforested land, or it's been produced using lower cost coal-fired carbon, when European producers are having to pay for relatively higher cost onshore wind or offshore wind or whatever it is. Similarly, with the circular economy regulations, they're really trying to avoid the reliance on imports from countries that may cause difficulties in the future. So the more that we can recycle, the less we need to get new, the less we need to rely on other countries. Well, if you look at those regulations, if you were to bet in 5 years' time, are there going to be more or less of those regulations? It's relatively straightforward. There will be more. And interestingly, when Jim was referring to governments needing to have policy and incentives, most governments simply do not have the availability of cash to provide the kinds of incentives for decarbonisation that they were providing, say, 10 years ago. So an awful lot of what we see from a regulatory perspective is going to be the stick rather than the carrot. Although we have a great grants and incentives team if you want to know more about the grants and incentives that are available, but that they're only going to increase. And then you've got the third kind of regulation, which is greenwashing. And those regulations are aimed at stopping companies basically misrepresenting their position to their stakeholders and the market more widely. So if you take those 3 kinds of regulations and appreciate that most organizations are facing all of them and are trying to work out what to do. They're trying to work out which one should they focus on. Is there a low-hanging fruit that if we comply with that will cover us off? Or should we be looking at every single regulation and trying to deal with them? What we've tended to find until very recently is that most clients had a knee-jerk reaction to these regulations. So each time a new one popped up, it was like whack-a-mole, literally trying to deal with it. And going to your fantastic point about data, a lot of the data that's needed for all these various regulations has a crossover.
Yep.
So they're reinventing the wheel every time they deal with a regulation separately. In addition, within many of our clients, they will have one person responsible for example, disclosure regulations. That's usually the chief sustainability officer or somebody who was given that role years ago. The lawyers tend to deal with greenwashing, and then your head of procurement and your supply chain people deal with all those operational regulations, understandably. But there isn't that connectivity and that coming together where they're sharing that information, implementing data gathering, which is operating across the piece, putting in place systems which are complementary, and they're creating interface risk. Now, we are starting to see a change in that, and I could give you numerous examples of where we've simply had meetings with clients and we've said, look, let's just get all these key functional heads in one room. And we've started the discussion, and it's become very clear that there is a lot of risk. So, huge amount of regulation, covering lots of different areas, and clients, broadly speaking, not applying as centralised and as a holistically integrated approach that they could. But we're seeing that change already, and I would imagine in 5 years' time we won't be having the same conversation.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Would either of you like to contribute on that theme at all? Anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I think there's always a very sort of philosophical divide between, the US and Europe. So to your point about the big stick, that's always, much more European perspective. So, with 3 bits on the stage, don't want it to slant too much that way. But, even in Europe, we're starting to see the limits for now of the appetite for regulation. So the, deforestation rule, hiccuping this morning, I think, in the CSDDD, had to be pared back a little bit and pushed over the finishing line. So it's because it's such a broad and complex space, you can regulate everything, and things can be very granular, and you've got to see the big picture. You can, boil the ocean and not really get to the end goal with regulation if it's not well honed. But very much over here, it's much more incentive. How can we channel the market in the right direction? How can the IRA nudge industries in the right places to sort of change the energy system? The true answer is going to be somewhere between incentive and stick type outcomes, but there is a sort of interesting philosophical cultural divide being played out there as we see it.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to move on to another very kind of chewy subject, I think you could say, which is how companies can address the challenge of balancing economic growth and environmental sustainability. I've heard some speakers before saying actually those two do not have to be mutually exclusive, which may be one of your answers. I'm sorry if it is, but so I'll throw it open to you. Who would like to tell us the magic answer to that question?
I don't mind starting. Or
go.
Someone else. I agree completely. When I saw the question, I was like, well, these things are not diametrically opposed. In the short term, we're developing new technologies. There's a cost curve that has to be, lifted up, and we have to get economies of scale to make things cheaper. So implicitly, yes, there is a greater cost, and the two sort of perspectives are counterbalanced there. But in the long term, that should normalize. And if you think about our linear economy at the moment, the economy is somewhere around 7%. We have 7% recycling, so very linear economy. So you mine, extract a lot of materials. You have to transport them to the production facility. You make the goods. You transport them to the consumption, and consumption, waste, transport to waste sites, which are getting further and further away from where people live. So there's a whole load of transportation baked in there. If you have recycling of the products where they're used, you can recycle it at the facility. There's no transportation, you don't have the extraction. So inherently, there's a lot of costs that will be worked out in the long term, but it'll take a long time to get there. Some of the things we'll be able to do that way, some of the things we won't. But I disagree with the premise of the question in all situations.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I can share some examples of what we are doing with our customers, for example. So we work with this large tier 1 automotive OEM, like a supplier, and they were looking at sustainability from also like how they can reduce the cost overall, right? Because if like, especially if you have worked with the OT people or the plant operations people, all of their focus is in making sure that the machines are working and how can they reduce cost, right? So what we took was that we basically took sustainability and cost optimization as a one goal, right? And we said, okay, what exactly is the big lever for you for cost, right? And they said energy. And that's when we went back and said, okay, why don't we pick up a manufacturing plant and prove it to you that not only we can reduce your carbon, but we can also reduce your energy consumption. And then that directly ties into your cost optimization, right? So we went and did that project. It actually went to their CEO who had this as a mandate. And now we are doing it for 82 of the plants across like the world, right? So that's basically, you know, like just starting small and then showcasing them that, you know, as you said, right, sustainability goals and the business goals go hand in hand. Another thing that we are working with, you know, another of our like surprisingly automotive customer, but this is for the battery, right? So they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just to recover their batteries for their hybrid model, and we basically provide them an entire like digital platform for them to even like track and trace across the life cycle of how the battery not only just gets manufactured, but till the time it is within the vehicle being used. But then it also opens up an opportunity for them for a second line of business that, okay, if the battery is there, it still has life. It's just no longer usable for a car or a vehicle, but you can sell it to a data center provider, you can sell it to a power grid manufacturer for battery storage, right? And then you can also then, after that is used, you can then recycle it, right? So as the DPP regulations, which is another regulation which is coming up stronger in Europe, right? Eventually those things will become, and it directly affects your bottom line and top line both at the same time.
Yeah,
It sort of depends, though. It really depends. It depends what sector an organisation sits in. But I think that there are 3 points I would make. The first is that every corporate or financial institution has to be commercially and financially viable. So that's, you know, that's what needs to be understood. Most organisations will not do anything over and above what they have to do unless they can see some direct financial benefit within the short to medium term, going to your long-term point, and all the things that you've just mentioned go to a short to medium term benefit that they can, you know, they can justify. But having said that, I think that we are now moving to a world where value can be dramatically impacted by reputation. So listen to what you had to say to me about the deforestation regulation and it, you know, the problems that have been experienced with it. The fact that deforestation has got so much attention because of that regulation has already started to impact. So even if you were compliant with the regulation, but you were still causing some kind of other difficulty, which could cause one of your stakeholders reputational concern, they will require you to change. So I was given an example in a discussion earlier about a client of ours whose very large institutional shareholder was very concerned about their lack of a deforestation policy, and will probably pull out unless they are satisfied with that policy, regardless of what the regulation says. They're not interested in whether the regulation is complied with or not. They're interested in whether they will be reputationally damaged by having such a significant stake in a company that could be seen to be creating product from deforested land. And that's the world we're sort of moving to now, and that can have an impact on value. So the way that we've always perceived this and assessed it is going to be different, I think.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good way of thinking about it, whether in boardrooms the idea of reputational loss is going to be bigger than financial loss.
Well, the reputational loss will cause the financial loss, and it's the point now is that, and it was really interesting listening to Jim, organisations don't exist in the same way that they did before. They exist within an ecosystem of various stakeholders, and those stakeholders are different to the ones we had maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And so many of those stakeholders can affect the value of an organisation, and it's what matters to them that can then impact your value.
Remarkably, we're almost out of time, but what I was going to quickly do is just ask each of you to very briefly say how you feel about the future of net zero. So, Raoul.
I think from my perspective, right, and again, I'm not a policy person and I'm not a person who is like, so we have our teams internally who are looking at Amazon as a company and then building our own net zero strategies. But what I am really looking forward to, and I think it has a big potential, is the use of technology and digital technology to really accelerate the net zero goals that companies set up. And we are already seeing some good results. Like Amazon, right, like even forget about sustainability, Amazon as a company or as an organization, we always say that, we are a technology first company. Anything that we do across our retail operations or across our, ed devices like eco devices and all, or even like AWS, we always think of, how can we bring in technology to really accelerate that particular business. So I think we are seeing a lot of initial innovations happening from technology perspective. We are now working with a lot of customers leveraging generative AI to even reduce the time to even for example, analyzing reports, right? We just did pilots with a lot of customers who are using generative AI to actually build their ESG reports, right? And reducing the time to actually build it by 70 to 80%, or even understanding what the different regulations mean. So previously there used to be sustainability analysts who used to spend a lot of time just understanding the new regulation, hours, days, months. And now, these kind of applications are really helping, right? Yeah. AI is actually helping optimize, right? Because anything around optimization, you can directly tie it with sustainability in one form or the other, right? So I think I'm really looking forward to see how technology can accelerate the net zero goals and really help companies decarbonize.
Thank you. Sorry, very briefly, I think I've run over, which is not good for my debut. Michelle, how are you feeling?
Positive, but I think there are some countries around the world that need a lot more help, and there are various mechanisms that could help with that, like carbon credits. I'm personally somebody who supports the use of carbon credits as long as they are part of a structured transition plan, not a license to pollute or to abuse nature. And I really think unless we can get somewhere on carbon credits, certain parts of the world are going to really struggle to reach net zero in the time frame we need them to.
Great, thank you. And Tim?
Yeah, I don't want to say optimistic because there's still so long to go, so much to be done. But you can see from where we were 5 years ago, things are trending in the right direction. And there's the IRA, there's lots of big government type initiatives, but I actually sense individual responsibility is sort of permeating more as well. Folks are seeing what they can do in their everyday life to change things. A book that actually got me into this field about 5 or 6 years ago was Susie Amos Cameron, the director James Cameron's wife, had a book called One Meal a Day, and it's effectively saying if everyone who eats meat only ate meat once a day, it's not that much to give up. The net effect and the change in terms of emissions from livestock, etc., but also issues around water conservation as well, would have a tremendous impact. And I'm seeing that more and more sort of individually. I went home back to the UK a few weeks ago, and I had a friend who hadn't been on a plane for 3 years. And he said, it's just what I feel I'm doing for my kid. So that level of individual accountability makes me feel optimistic.
Yeah.
From the people's perspective. On a macro level, we've got a lot to do, so we've got to keep our foot down.
Great, thank you. It's good to end on an optimistic note. So please put your hands together for the 3 panelists. And so that's Tim, Michelle, and Raoul.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It's been
you.
a pleasure chatting to you. And if you'd all just stay around, we've got a fantastic keynote coming up in probably about 1 minute from Andrew Kimball, who's President and CEO for the New York City Economic Development Corporation, I hope, is that right? Not company. I wrote down company and crossed it out. So Economic Development Corporation, and The Harbour of the Future is the title, so I'm excited about that already. So thank you again, and I'll hand over.